and I hope things get better for you, right? And I can share resources I have, and I don't often say, tell me more, give me more information about you. So it's my way of trying to acknowledge without inviting too much, because I know if I invite more conversation, I likely cannot show up in the way they need me to. So I usually acknowledge with kindness and then move past it. There have been a few times that I have acknowledged, asked more about it, and got really invested in it. And that actually turned into an all-girls junior development mountain bike team that I started.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Stable Cyclist Podcast. My name is JP, and I am so glad you are here with me today. It is, of course, part 2 of my conversation today with Kelly Catale, and we are picking up right where we left off in the intro. But a few things before we jump into the rest of the interview. It is the month of May, the very end of the month of May, which means we have been in Mental Health Awareness Month all month long. And if you are new here, the Stable Cyclist Podcast, we are very much about bikes and mentality in life, but we are 100% also about mental health. We have had some incredible guests on tap this month, including Dr. Sam Rockwater and Dr. Beth Peter. We had our first Ask JP Anything episode that dove deep into my personal battle with bipolar disorder. If you have a question for an upcoming Ask JP Anything episode, you can send me a DM on Instagram at The Stable Cyclist, or you can send an email to thestablecyclist@gmail.com. This episode is brought to you by Flow Formulas. If you are training for a race or training just to feel better about life, then Flow Formulas Endurance Mix and Recovery Mix are for you. You can use the code JohnPeter15 at checkout and get a little discount on your next order. The biggest way you can help us continue to grow the podcast is by sharing things directly to people. If you have an episode that you like, share it with them. Let them know you care about them and that you were thinking of them when you heard this episode. That way we don't have to rely on an algorithm or any kind of marketing ploy to get these episodes in people's hands. Finally, in all my excitement last week to get the episode started, I completely forgot to mention that my guest is, of course, Kelly Catale, and she is the current single-speed mountain bike national champion in the United States. She is also a 3-time participant for the United States in the World Championships, as well as a long list of other top results. But as you'll hear today, she is so much more than just a bike racer. Enough of all that. Finally, it is time to bring Kelly Catale back into the studio.
I had a parent reach out to me, explain that they were concerned about some things with their daughter, and I became an unofficial mentor, and then that mentorship bloomed into a team. So every once in a while, it goes a little bit deeper than I think initially intended, but I don't regret a moment of that pathway and a moment of that chapter. So it's not like I'm saying, oh God, I made a mistake. But sometimes I can't help myself, and it's hard to say when, I don't have hard and fast rules around it. If someone really needs an ear and I can tell and I have the space to respond, messaging is a great way for me to do it, because then if I have to let something sit, I can. So yeah, that's my...
So is that the birth story of Kelcat Devo? Is that how that got started?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Tell us more about this team. You don't have to get into the details of how the team came about, but tell us more about the team and how what you do, and where did the idea come from? And it sounds a little bit like these conversations, but I think it's a big piece. Again, when I go to your website, it's one of like 4 main pieces I can go learn about when I'm there. And so, I want to hear more about this.
Yeah. Thank you for asking. The Kelcat Devo program is an all-girls junior development mountain bike team that's focused on whole athlete development, which includes good mental health, good physical health, and just good emotional, sort of social health. And we are a registered nonprofit, so I went through that whole process of documentation and paperwork and applications, all that stuff. And we are an organization that right now serves a small portion of the junior girls in New England. So we're New England based. We have 6 girls on the team. They're spread out through New England. And the program is designed to be the guidance and knowledge and resource sharing space that I desperately needed when I was a high school athlete, female. So I am trying to be the role model I needed. I am trying to give the education I really needed back then, and the empathy and the compassion and all the things that I think our society doesn't do a great job right now, or is maybe getting better, but still isn't great at supporting for our young female athletes. Our male athletes still struggle with lots of things. And it's been really remarkable for me over the past few years to see some of that firsthand, to see a lot of the boys that I've interacted with struggle with things that I admittedly didn't really think were a thing boys struggle with, right? When they're that age. And I'm sure I was just blind to it when I was that age, but I did know of all the stuff girls struggle with. So, eating disorders and mental health challenges, self confidence issues, social challenges, right? Being able to feel like you're
Yeah.
part of a team and feeling safe and not being bullied. All of these things that social media makes even worse now, right? But
Yeah.
that this team is a space for us to help cultivate good whole athlete development, and also allow these girls who are competitive and who enjoy being in this sport, to be competitive and feel celebrated by that rather than exiled. What ends up happening is, as a girl, at least from my own experience and observing now, it feels like there's 2 paths. There's the stay with the group and try to fit in and don't put yourself in this space of like standing out because it makes you an outcast in a way. Or you choose that path of outcast and being a one off and pushing and kind of fighting for your own resources. And that makes you an individual in a sport that's already very individual. And it's hard to find friends in that space. It's, you ultimately have to band with the boys, and they're not always the most welcoming. Many are, but not always. And this sport is not, the way the coaching set up, the way that just the sport in general set up, is not set up for promoting females in this sport. So um, I'm trying to break that mold. And I've done it by first creating a team that races in the region generally, some local races. We go to national championships. And I'm actually looking to the future, in the future years, to figure out how we can grow that footprint even bigger. Because right now, a 6-person team is pretty small compared to the actual need and the amount of girls in New England and beyond who could benefit from the mission and the general principles that we operate under. So right now, the team is small, the future is big, and it did come about from one of those one-off messages where I had a parent reach out to me asking me about pre-race anxiety and self-confidence and that kind of stuff, and ended up just, it bloomed into, how could I make this more formal? How could I have,
Yeah.
rather than just focusing on one girl, how can I share all these similar conversations and tools and all these things that I'm doing? How can I do that for 6 girls, for 20 girls, for 120 girls, right? How many people can I impact and share those resources so that everyone feels served in that way? And it's something that's very young. We're growing. We have an all-female board of directors, and I just absolutely love that because I think it helps align with our mission and just the message we're trying to send into the world for sure.
Kelly, when you started this organization, obviously, you started from absolutely the ground. Did you have other organizations that have a similar paradigm that you looked to, or that mentored you, or have you been kind of forced to like invent this as you go?
There's been a lot of invent as I go, and invent as I go means lots of mistakes as I go.
Of course,
I feel
yeah, of
like
course.
so many things I've done, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or I should have handled this differently, or I shouldn't have promised this much because I don't have the time for it. My passion far outweighs my capacity right now,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's a bit of a trap for me, unfortunately. But I did learn a bit from some parallel organizations, partly just from networking with other people. So there's a woman who runs a really well-known junior development team that serves both boys and girls. I mean, there is, to my knowledge, there is no female-only junior development mountain bike team in the United States. I am 99% certain that's true. There might be organizations that are junior development that have a female team, but they also have a male contingent or a branch.
Right.
It's
Yep.
they. But to have all resources, 100% of them focused on females, I don't believe that exists anywhere else. And maybe I'm wrong, and I'm very happy to be wrong. I would love to be wrong because that would mean there are more girls getting what they need. But um, I was learning from other Devo programs that exist. So Durango Devo was a big one, and
Yep.
they shared with me documentation, things like here were our bylaws and our this is what articles of incorporation look like. Here's our mission statement. Look at our website. All these things that honestly, I mean, in the world, I think we have this tendency to not share. It's mine. I worked really hard on
Yeah.
it. And to do that means reinvention all the time. And so this organization particularly was like, no, we've had to learn the hard way. We don't want others to have to learn the hard way. So we're going to share some resources with you. And they did. And it was really, really, really impactful and really helpful for me. So yeah, I've sort of had a bit of a kickstart, but a lot of the stuff I'm doing, I'm learning as I go, and it is a lot of hard lessons.
For
Things like
sure. Yeah.
funding and grants and all those things. So the nice thing is I'm trying to surround myself with people who know better than I do so that they can
Yeah.
help inform me and point out when I might be misguided or misdirected. And I've been trying not to take it personally, which is another challenge in its own way.
Absolutely. Uh, so let's kind of stay with Calcat Devo and then also your pro career for a second, and something that I think nobody wants to talk about, but if we're going to talk about anxiety for people, whether it's diagnosed or not, it is trying to get sponsors and funding. And that is so difficult. I think about that time period every year from, kind of, I guess now July through November, where you're really hunting and people are really selling their services. What what has that been like for you? Because you have your own team essentially. Like you race for yourself, and then you also have this Devo team that you're running. How stress inducing is that time period? And maybe it's not because you have good relationships at this point, but I just think about any time that I've had to write an email, even if it's for an existing sponsor about next year. It is a challenge and it is a stressful time period. And so, what is that like for you, and how do you work through it?
Yeah, great question. I Oh gosh, sponsorship season. Honestly, sponsorship year round gives me hives. Not really, metaphorically speaking. Thank goodness. But oh my goodness, it's so stressful. And part of that is because sponsorship feels very much like a measurement of your worth as an athlete. And
Absolutely.
it's very translatable to, okay, someone's willing to give me this, that's how much I'm worth. And it might not be that, but it is hard not to tell that story when you're working in that space. So yes, I do have Team Kelcat, which is my team, Team Kelcat Racing, essentially, which then broke off into Team Kelcat Devo. And there's those two pieces that I admittedly have tried to marry a little bit to make it a little simpler for me because, as I mentioned, my passion outweighs my capacity. So I have all these ideas for sponsors and whatnot, but the ability to write a million posts and make all these blog posts and make videos and all of that is really, really difficult when I am an N of one. And now I'm an executive director of a giant organization in New England, and 7, 8, 9 weeks out of the year, I am working 70 plus hours, right?
Yeah.
I really don't even have the bandwidth to train right now. So okay, so I actually want to take a moment to explain sponsorship and the way that my mindset has shifted with it. When I first was a pro, I'm using air quotes because in my mind, you can be a different two, like there's sort of two levels of pro, maybe there's a million, but the first one is you have a pro license, right? So you
Yeah.
get your license, it says elite or pro or whatever. And that is, I mean, that is technically pro. Then there's the sponsor level of pro. Like, okay, I can have a license, but I can still race for my local team. And so I can be a pro, but still represent just, the team that I race for. Or I can be a pro on a pro team or have my own sponsorship and my own program that I create, which is called privateer. And so I am a privateer. I chose to do that very early on in my career because I want control. I'm a control freak. No, no, I have control uh, challenges. I'm trying not to label myself. So I have challenges with relinquishing control to others because I want to have a say in what I do and be able to direct my energy and my focus in the ways that I want because I have such
Yeah.
limited energy, right? And time. I don't want to be told you have to go here because that's what we expect of you. I would rather find sponsors that support me and believe in what I want so that I can chase the things that I want with the limited time that I have. And initially, when I was first looking for sponsors, I was, for lack of a better word, desperate. So I was just reaching out to all kinds of companies. And I had a glove sponsor, and I had a granola bar sponsor, and I had all these sponsors that I didn't really need, but it made me look like a pro, right? Like, look at this list of names that sponsor me.
Yeah.
And in the background, what wasn't shown is how many photos I owed them per month and how much work I had to put into posts and all this
Yep.
stuff behind the scenes. And actually, if I was to say, okay, if 1 hour of my time, based on my engineering salary, right? 1 hour of my
Yep.
time is worth, let's say, we'll make it an even $50. Let's say $50 an hour. I I work for engineering. Okay, then is 1 hour of a post? Am I getting one set of gloves that are like $30, right? And I have to make three posts I have to make 3 posts a month and take a bunch of photos. Let's say that all takes 8 hours of time, right? I have to go do a photo shoot or upload photos, create these posts. Now, okay, so if that's 8 hours times 50, that's $400. Am I getting $400 worth of gloves? No, not per month. So is that really worth it? I didn't ask myself that question until like years into being a pro. So for
Yeah.
me, I was investing way more of my energy and my worthwhile time into something that made me feel real, feel like a pro, help resolve this imposter syndrome I feel, but it wasn't really worth it in the end. So I have whittled down my sponsors to be the ones that align with my mission as a person, my mental health advocacy, and with my team, and know that I have limitations on my time and the ability to post and whatnot, but believe enough in what I do openly with the community that they're willing to support me still, even with limited photos or posts or whatever. So now sponsorship is way less stressful than it was previously. I was sending emails out, calls, cold calls, all that stuff. And I got real good at hearing no. Actually, I got real good at hearing crickets
Yeah.
because no one even makes the time to say no these days. So, yeah, in my mindset around what makes me a real pro and that sponsorship kind of paradigm has shifted quite a bit to what's worth my time, what's worth it for me to invest in that partnership, and how is that partnership serving me? Again, that goes back to, is this really serving me as a person and an athlete? And now sponsorship is still very much anxiety inducing, partly because the economy is really struggling right now, particularly in this
Yeah.
industry. And I've
Yeah.
had I've had contracts that I've signed that have been pulled out from under me, right? So I was relying on something. I stopped pursuing alternatives to this particular product or whatever because I believed that I had it. And then further down the line, it's like, oh, sorry, Kelly, we actually can't honor this contract because of budget cuts. And so now I feel very weary. I feel kind of skeptical. And honestly, the whole topic of sponsorship, I can feel my heart rate right now rising talking about it. Um, and it is not easy. And if anyone gives the impression, like I have a lot of people who say, I've mentioned sponsorship before in, posts, right? And I've had people who don't really understand, and I give them the grace. I know that they don't understand, who've been like, oh, just reach out to like Santander Bank. They'll give you money to put a logo on your jersey. And I'm like, yeah, do you want to tell me who it is in Santander Bank who can give me that money? Because just finding the right person and then getting them to answer an email or a call takes hours of time. So
Yeah.
there is definitely a
Well,
miscommunication.
and then if that person that you have there leaves,
Yeah,
you're back to being in the air. I had that this past year where I had a really good relationship with someone at a company. They moved on, and it like I just disappeared completely off the radar because of it.
yeah,
And it's like, well, I don't know a way back in here. So yeah, I
right.
guess I'm screwed.
And what kind of message does that send your brain, right? So, oh, I'm
Yes.
not worth it, right? I'm not
Yeah.
worthy of this support. And here's why. Look, they don't even put the effort in to get to know me more than just the one contact I had, and now I'm nobody to them. Oh gosh,
Yeah.
I'm not worth it, right? Like I'm not a real pro. Those kinds of
Yeah.
things go through my head all the time. And it is bureaucracy, it is politics, it is all the other things. And it's hard not to tell myself the narrative that villainizes me and makes me feel like I'm the point of failure. So, yeah, it is sponsorship is a really ugly topic in my brain, and I dread August through November, July through November, because no matter how many times I tell myself it is not a measure of my worth as a person or my worth as an athlete or a team manager or whatever,
It
it's
sure
really
feels
hard to
like it.
believe it.
Yeah, let's move on to some better topics.
Sure.
I was just curious because I knew it was a unique situation. You know, we have been talking a lot about mental health. You have your pro mountain bike career, your privateer career. It sounds like it's difficult to train right now. You raced, I believe it was Pisgah stage race with Gordon
Yep,
Wadsworth this spring. Is that correct?
that is correct. We had a real ball all week.
Yeah. And what does your career or what does your racing look like right now, given your new role and given what you still are trying to accomplish as an athlete? Where are you kind of at with all of that?
Mm.
And maybe that's evolving.
It's so this is the $1 million question is what does it
Yeah.
look like now? What will it look like in the future? And what I'd like to say is I'm unpacking that as we go. So I used to be, still am, maybe deep down, the kind of person who likes to have a plan and likes to know what the future holds because I like control, right? I like to know that I'm on the right track. And I have been learning to be a little more open minded to just let things be what they are and see what happens. And this might be the first real time where I have said, I don't know. And I'm going to just let it unfold and see what happens.
Yeah.
So, right now, here's what I'm thinking. What that actually will be, I don't know. But what I'm thinking right now is that I want to sustain enough fitness and enough of my kind of love for training because I will say that I love process. I love just going out and working out hard. I don't love racing in the way that I think a lot of pros, well, maybe that's the story we all tell ourselves, right? But I
Yeah.
don't love racing in the way that others do. And how many others, I don't know. And I won't try to put a number on that. But I think that every time I've shown up for a really big race in Europe or World Championships, whatever it might be, I have more feelings of why am I putting myself through this than I'm so glad I'm here. And that often has made me question why I'm doing it. But then it comes back to being a good role model and getting to a point where where I've reached this point of accolades or validity or credibility as an athlete that I can move on to the next thing and be able to have a legacy in my community or whatever that doesn't depend on my results. And so ultimately I've been seeking, I think, for some time, been seeking that level of credibility. But the problem is that no one tells you what that level is, right? Who gets to
Yeah.
decide? And I think at the end of the day, I get to decide. And I think being part of Team USA for 3 years in a row, I think being a national champion, so that's the jersey you can see behind me is my national champ jersey for single speed mountain biking. that feels like enough that I have the breathing room now to say, I think I'm just going to race when I want to. I'm going to race and do the ones that feel good to me because of the other pieces around them. That maybe I'm there because I'm there for the Devo girls, or I'm there because it's a local race and it's a community thing, or I've always wanted to race single speed on this course, or whatever it is, showing up because I want to, not because I have to. And the racing in the future for me, for sure, includes I'm going to race at a marathon mountain bike race in Carrabassett, Maine. So the Carrabassett Backcountry Cycle Challenge in Carrabassett Valley. It's in mid-July, I believe. That one is one of my favorite races because it's super fun and it's like a coming home kind of experience. Will I race it on my single speed? TBD. Don't know yet. Might race it on my gear bike because some of those hills are brutal, and there's one that I can barely make it up even on my pie plate gear. But I also then the next week will go out to defend this jersey. So I do hope to defend my single speed national champion title. And then what comes next? I'm not sure. I The weird part is over the past, I guess it's been since Pisgah that I've actually trained consistently. Because right after Pisgah, I had given my notice at work for my engineering job in the middle
Okay.
of Pisgah week. I mean, I wasn't like out on course and giving my notice. I took a call in the evening after a race, told my boss, gave them my notice, and then immediately came home, finished up work, and then jumped right into New England Youth Cycling executive director role. And I have not stopped since. So I have not trained 3 days in a row in since Pisgah, essentially. I've been, whatever, and I don't miss it. I don't actually
Yeah.
feel this pull the way that I thought I would, like this deep guilt or this regret. I feel fulfillment. I feel like I'm on a path toward that legacy that I want to leave, that I want to have this mark on my community. So if it comes at the cost of a little bit of fitness or a little bit of training hours or whatever, for now, I'm actually okay with that. And I'm surprising myself because I thought I would feel a lot of negative feelings and I don't. So I don't know what that says about what the future holds for me, but I do think it's giving me space to breathe in a way that allows me to reflect on what my racing will look like. And maybe by being happy and feeling less expectation and pressure, maybe I will come back to racing and feel even stronger, right? It's not to say that my career is done, but it is to say that maybe I needed a little time to reset anyway. So some of the experiences I had last year really made me feel that way anyhow because I had a pretty rough end to my season last year. It ended early, and it was a step back and a kind of reset for me. Yeah.
You said your season ends early last year. And this is where the other piece of, like I said at the beginning, like, oh, we both had, femur fractures of some kind in college. And we, both of our years last year ended very suddenly due to mountain bike crashes that resulted in concussion.
Yeah.
And I think they were actually within a couple of weeks of each other. And you then, both of us also struggled greatly with post concussion syndrome from what I've gleaned on your social media throughout the year. I know at some point in April, maybe, you said, "This is the last time I'm posting about this. I'm
Yeah.
just going to deal with it on my own from now on." And I'm still on the edge of getting out of the woods. We've made a lot of progress the last month, but I want to hear just about what happened, what your process was like, and I want to really talk about where mentally that took you for the year, because I've had so many people that, first of all, don't understand that a concussion can last for a really long time.
Yeah.
And then they don't understand how it impacts how you feel while you're also trying to maybe deal with other mental health issues. So I guess we're going to dive into the deep end here with this one probably, but I
Yeah.
want to hear your story. I want to hear what happened. I want to talk about this because most people don't talk about what happens when you hit your head too hard.
Yeah. I'm grateful that you're asking this of me because it is a piece. Admittedly, I like to be able to have some time, some space between an event and talking about it because I like to be able to reflect on it and really get a grasp on it. This one I think is far enough behind me that I can give some perspective. And I don't even want to say behind me like it's gone. It's still very real, and there are things I'm doing still to help myself. But to go back, in early July, I was on a ride in the rain and I crashed. I was with a group. I crashed headfirst into a rock wall. And at the time, I got a black eye. Luckily, I was wearing glasses, so I didn't like pop my eyeball or something, right? But I did. I got a black eye. I had all these cuts on my face. My helmet got banged up, but I kept riding, and it was maybe a couple miles home, right? I was with this group. We were like, oh, I'm fine. And I was with actually the Devo girls. So I wanted to show that I was strong and that I was fine. And it's okay. Everything's fine. Don't worry about me. And so I got back on my bike. I definitely didn't feel 100%, but, who does when they hit their face in a rock wall? And I get back and I take like a selfie video because I was doing a video blog for Vittoria at the time, Vittoria Tires. And so I took footage of it and I'm like, look at my carnage. We had a great ride today. Look how stoked we were. And then the next day I took more video like, wow, this is what happens when you crash. Um, but that night of the crash, I had my husband shine a light into my eyes. I had him do, basic kind of concussion things. I knew the date and the time and the president and all that stuff. And so we just concluded there was no concussion because, those were the things I knew. And uh, I only less than a week later went out to mountain bike national championships in Pennsylvania where it was like 9,000 degrees and 10,000% humidity for days straight. And I raced twice. I rode a ton because I was pre-riding the course with the Devo girls, with other kids that I coach. It was nonstop. And the entire week I felt like garbage. But it is hard to parse when you feel like garbage, when it is not a very visible injury. It's hard to detect it as anything other than dehydration or lack of fueling or just general fatigue. So that whole week I raced and I remember racing and being like, whoa, Kelly, you got to take it down. Like something's weird here and you must be really dehydrated. You don't feel right. You need to take down the pace. And luckily I still was able to push myself hard enough to win this jersey. So that to me was like, I'm fine. I won the jersey. I'm a national champion. Um, so I moved on. And just a few weeks later, I was supposed to go to the World Championships for marathon mountain biking. And so I was continuing to train. And I could not make it through a workout. I would come back early from a ride and be like, man, I am tired. I must not have slept well last night. Man, I must be dehydrated, or I'm not sleeping well. I'm not giving myself enough time to sleep. I'd be like, gosh, my handlebars felt weird. My seat felt weird. I just felt kind of whatever. Or like lights feel weird. Trees going by feel awkward. And
Yeah.
I honestly was so confused about what was happening. And I just kept being like, gotta sleep more. Until weeks in, then I had a workout where I was trying to do some intervals up a hill. A car passed me at exactly the time when I was up the steepest part of the pitch. It was about a minute and a half into my 5 minute interval. And a car passed me, and the sound and the movement made my vision black out. So I was all of a sudden, my vision was like, ooh, and I immediately stopped because I've never felt that before. My brain was like, you need to stop. You need to stop right now. And I've done intervals and my brain's been like, you need to stop. This hurts. But I know the difference. And in that moment, I was like, I've never felt that before. So then I said, okay, I'll just rest for a few minutes and I'll try again. And it happened again. And I'm like, I'm going home. And I called my coach and I said, something's wrong. I don't know what it is. I've never felt this before. And we tried to work back to when I really started not feeling well. And it was that crash. And I realized I had a concussion. And it took me 3 weeks to figure it out. And they say when you have a concussion, every minute you go back to play is a day or maybe even a week added to your healing time.
Yeah.
But I only had 2 weeks until the World Championships at that point. And being the person who felt some level of pressure and expectation from everyone around me, I said, I'll take a week off and I'll probably feel fine. So I flew to Scotland and had not done an interval workout successfully for like 5 weeks and was able to do some pickups on a training ride, like a course inspection. And I raced the World Championships, got through it. I made it through. I didn't crash. I finished 29th, which is the best result I've ever had at World Championships. And again, was like, oh, I must be fine. Everything's fine. And then I got back to training normal. And then in September, I was at the national championships course in Alabama. I crashed again, but it was so minor. It was so minor. It was late September. I just fell on my side. I didn't even hit my head. I hit my arm and my knee on a rock, but the force was enough, as I learned later. The force was enough to like jar my neck sideways. And they say a lot of I don't know, researchers, who's they?
Yeah, yeah.
Researchers say that a lot of concussions, you don't even hit your head, but the torsional kind of spinning motion is enough to move your brain and cause that swelling and damage. And that's what happened, I guess. I mean, at the time, again, was sort of like, well, it's the national championships. I have to race. And I felt fine. I was able to get through training for the next few days. I woke up on race morning and could not eat. I was so nauseous and I was irritable and I was grumpy and everything felt weird, like sounds and light. And I was like, wow, this is weird. Why am I so nervous? I actually thought I was excited about the race and I kept assigning it to nerves. I raced, finished the race, came in fifth, thought, wow, I guess I'm fine. Like, can you see a pattern here? The next day, we drove to West Virginia. I felt really sick, like nausea,
Yeah.
car sickness while I was driving, which is weird because I've never had that happen before. Lights and sound and everything were uncomfortable to the point where I was like, I think I have a second concussion. I think I was never really recovered from my first one.
Yeah.
And I had to shut it down. We drove to Boston Children's Hospital where they have a really good sports medicine clinic that treats adults, right? I had to call them and be like, I'm an adult. Will you still treat me? And they're like, yes, that's what our sports medicine clinic does. It's not just Boston Children. And so they treated me, said I had a concussion, and I had to shut it down for a long time. And I didn't feel like myself. And the problem with concussion is it's so invisible and so
Yeah.
different for every person, right? The brain is such a mystery to us anyway, to scientists, but then also concussion manifests in such different ways for each person that you can't say, oh, you have concussion if you feel this way. And for me, I started to question my sanity. I'd think to myself, is this concussion or am I just hungry? Is it concussion or am I just tired? Am I not sleeping well? I was tossing and turning in my sleep all night. I was not sleeping well at all. And sleep is where you restore, it's where you recover, it's where you heal. And I wasn't sleeping, so I wasn't healing. And then I started to think, okay, well, I'm supposed to be doing this gravel race coming up, or I'm supposed to be doing X, Y, and Z for my sponsors. I was supposed to race the World Cup in West Virginia, the first ever marathon World Cup in the United States, just a few days after I had that crash, that
Yeah.
national
Yeah.
championships race. And I felt this deep guilt that I wasn't doing it. And so then I started to tie, kind of like weave with the concussion symptoms, anxiety. And I didn't realize at the time that's what I was doing. So my concussion symptoms lasted a really long time. And I was seeing a doctor, I was seeing a physical therapist, I was going to the people I thought I needed to, and nothing was getting rid of it. I would get on my bike, try to do a workout, and I felt lightheaded and I felt dizzy and vision, my like sound bothered me, everything, and it just kept coming back every single time. It got to the point where I finally said, I need to seek real specialist help. And in February, so remember, I hit my head. Well, no, I got a second concussion, didn't even hit my head in September. And it wasn't until February until I was able to see a specialist. Actually, it was January. It was late January. I was able to see a specialist in Pittsburgh. I'm going to tell you the experience I had very honestly because I think actually some people need to hear it. And whether you only have three people who followed along to this point or whatever, whoever's listening, I think needs to hear what I went through so that it feels valid for others. I went to see a specialist who I was told was the best in the business. I saw him. He's a neuroscientist, neurobiologist, or neuropsychologist, I think is his background, and he's the king of the castle at this clinic. I had signed up to have a meeting with him, a session with two different physical therapists, a vestibular and an exertion physical therapist, and a psychologist. I met with him first. He asked me a bunch of questions and immediately said, Kelly, your concussion is gone. You are experiencing anxiety. it is your anxiety that is causing all of these other issues. And here are the rules for you. You need to stop using your bike computer. You need to stop talking about this with every single person in your life and just forget that it's happening. You need to let go of all metrics in your life, and you need to just move on. And Kelly, I would typically prescribe an anti-anxiety medication for someone in your position, but you are a pro athlete and you can do hard things. So, I'm not giving you medication because I know that you can get through this on your own. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, thank God, I'm not weak enough to need medication. I don't need medication. He's right. I am a pro. I'm a real pro, and I don't need medicine. I don't need to put that in my body. So I listened to him and I said, yes, I can do this. I can not talk about it with anyone. I can isolate myself. Yeah, that's a great idea. Then I moved on to all these other specialists. The psychiatrist I met with said, Kelly, based on everything you've told me, you need medication. You really should go on for a short period of time, some anti-anxiety medication, because this is really severe. And I think that you could get yourself out of what's happening with it. However, Dr. So-and-so, can't remember his name, and honestly have not retained that information because it's not important for me anymore.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
Dr. So-and-so says pro athletes shouldn't be taking medication unless it's an emergency. And he doesn't think this is an emergency. So we're not going to give it to you. But in 90 days or 60 days, whenever you come back, maybe you'll need it and we can talk about it. So that night, I sat in the airport and I wrote a post that said, please stop asking me about my concussion, or I'm not talking about it anymore. And it was my way of trying to protect myself because people kept bringing it up. They kept asking
yeah,
about it, and then it kept being real for me.
yeah,
And what I was doing was isolating myself, which any person who knows enough about anxiety and depression knows that is a recipe for failure. But in my mind, I'm a pro athlete and I'm strong. So for the next 3 days, I sat in my sorrow. I sat in shame. I was like, no, I'm a pro athlete. Why can't I get a handle on this? And I just spiraled. I unraveled. That's the best word I could use. I literally was like
yeah,
a ball of yarn that just slowly was unraveling to the point where I was left with just a fraying end. And I had a super breakdown. I was like, I'm weak. I'm not a real pro. I don't deserve all the things I've had. I'm never going to get better. I can't talk about it with anyone because I'm not going to get better if I do. And I just sat in this shame that was so deep and so bad that I didn't know where to put myself. And I finally was like, you know what? I think I need medication. I've I had taken medication when I was in my early 20s to get out of depression. I promised myself I would never need it again, that I was strong enough that I didn't need it, right? And there's this stigma around medication. And I called that psychiatrist that I met with and I said, I don't care what King doctor whatever says. I need you to prescribe me some medication and I need it now or I don't know what I'm going to do. And
yeah.
he did. He prescribed it. So the key to getting out of all of this concussion stuff is Zoloft for me. I started taking medication. That night, the first night of taking it, I was holding it in my hand for probably 30 minutes. Just a little pill, little blue pill. And um, my husband said to me, "What the heck are you doing?" And I said, this is a moment that the moment I do it is a moment I can't take back. And it is a moment that I feel weak, like I'm taking some sort of shortcut, like I'm not a real pro, all those other the narratives, right? I'm actually like holding back a lot of emotion because for me, this was a
Yeah.
turning point. And he looked at me and he said, Kelly, there's no one waiting for you on the other end of this experience. When you are finally better, there's no one waiting for you with an award that says you suffered the most and you still made it. No one is going to say, congratulations, you didn't take any shortcuts. You didn't quit on your morals and you didn't let down your whatever guard because some doctor told you that you're a real pro. You wouldn't be a real pro unless you were able to get through it without medication. So take the damn medication, Kelly. And I was like, thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. I'm going to take it. And it's transformed me. It's I don't know that I'd be where I am right now if it wasn't for it. I don't know that I'd be able to handle all the stress that I've gone through over the past even 5 weeks of dealing with difficult parents and difficult coaches and all these things in my new role as executive director, had it not been for some leveling of my emotions and the chemicals in my brain with that medication. So I feel no shame now. Did I in the time? It took a lot of effort. Yes, it did. And did I feel shame? Yes, I did. And I'm glad I did it. And I can hold space for both, right? I can be happy about something and still feel this kind of pull away from it. So how did I get out of it? Was acknowledging that it was no longer concussion, and it absolutely was my anxiety that was making these symptoms continue. I was becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, and letting myself seek the help that I needed was enough to get me out of it. And I actually have not shared publicly about that medication because of the stigma. I still fight in my own head about it. And now talking about it, I'm like, maybe that's going to be my next mental health Monday, is
Oh,
to
it's so
share
it's
about it.
yeah, it's don't apologize for sharing that. It's so powerful what you just said, and don't ever apologize for like holding or like being emotional about it
Yeah.
either. Like I think about how many people get hung up on getting real help for their mental health over medication and the fear of it, and the situation you just described of holding that medicine and feeling like, man, if I take this, like I'm not me anymore. And it's like, you haven't been you for a long time. Like you legit need to just get help. And I went through the same thing. It took me like a decade before I was ready to really admit, like, oh, I need real help here for what's going on in my life. And so what you just shared was so powerful, regardless of if it has to do with the concussion or just life. Like, it's things that people need to hear.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
I
What I will say is that no therapist has helped me with this piece, but I have this tendency when I'm getting into a bad place where I say, like, I don't feel like myself right now, right? So I'm feeling anxious. I don't feel like myself. And that has created this narrative in my head that myself does not include anxiety or depression, right? So I'm that there is a self of me
oh
that
yeah.
transcends my mental health, right? And the truth is that I am those. That is me, and that the more that I resist it, and the more that I assign it as an other version of myself or an outside piece, the more that I vilify it, right? And the more that try to find ways to avoid it rather than face it and try to integrate it into my life. So the like this I don't I haven't been me for however long. It is something that I was saying in my head, like I don't feel like myself. And the reality is I have been myself all along. It's been 34 years of me being myself, and the acceptance of what that self looks like is the piece that I really
Yeah.
need to work on, because the more that I put this box around this piece that I feel is so negative and so awful, the more that I want to hide it from myself, the more that I want to hide it from everyone else. And I think that's a big piece around my mental health advocacy, kind of tying this full circle from the beginning, is I am allowing myself the space to, instead of saying, I've got this one black box that's super dark and super, evil that I have to hold space for. And sometimes it sits like right in overpowering in my head. Instead, could I maybe let it dilute? And so it's just a light gray across all of my body, right? Like it's just in my arms and my legs and in my chest. Like, can it be just a piece of me, one small pigment in the larger fabric, the color of my life? And I think that's the reckoning I'm going through right now, which is, instead of trying to heal or solve or rid myself of those things, is, can it instead be myself? And that can myself be, can that be myself, be okay with that? And that's the language I've been try to help myself avoid, is saying I don't feel like me, because then it kind of, like I said, it sort of vilifies that in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Threaded through everything that we've talked about today has been identity and who we are, whether it's talking about imposter syndrome as a racer, or feeling like we're trying to run a nonprofit, or recovering from injury and finding ourselves within sport. You obviously, a big piece of who you are as a person and where your value lies is a part of why you're doing the Devo team and imparting that to the young girls. And where does that come from? Where does that shift for you? Like, hey, we got to find our value in something other than this this sport or this thing that we're doing. It has to come from something else. Where does that drive for you come from as we wrap up today?
Um, Gosh, I mean, I suppose there's two ways I could approach that. Where does it come from? Like, where did it originate? I think it was that real milestone in my life when running was stripped away from me by something that I had no control over. Well, I guess one could argue I did by restricting my diet many, months or years before that. But when running was taken away from me, I had to face the reality that everything I had up to that point was tied to my running. Who I was, what I called myself, what I did, the value I saw myself as having was all related to running. And inadvertently, I didn't do this intentionally, but I started to spread my self-worth out over multiple pieces, right? So I had my classes and I had friends and I had extracurriculars that I was trying, like a women in engineering kind of society. So SWE, Society of Women Engineers, I think is what it was called. And there's all these other things that I was doing, volunteer organization. And as a result, I had distributed my worth across multiple avenues so that no one piece was holding too much command over who I was. And then once I found cycling, it was just one more piece to the puzzle rather than my identity on the whole. And I have felt myself dip into that space where something has taken over so much that it does feel like it's consuming me. And then I usually something bad happens, and then I have to take that sort of step back and say, okay, what am I holding on to so much that I can't see the lightness and all the other things that I have? So, where is it coming from? I think it's coming from this experience that I've had that I have seen myself crumble. I have seen myself fall apart when I do invest too much of me and my sense of worth into one thing. So, I have been trying to help the girls that are impacted by this junior development team to help them see that life is more than just your sport. Your value is more than just your results on a page. And it's also the way that you show up in your community. It's also the way you show up in school and the way you give back to your family. All of those pieces, your friends, everything makes up who you are. And that big picture person is the person who will walk alongside you in this whole journey that you'll have moving forward. And that brings richness to your life, which then will help prevent burnout. It will help prevent all the things that I think a lot of girls in particular, but boys too, fall victim to at a young age, where it's a win at all costs mindset. It's a everything else falls to the wayside kind of mindset. And that's just a recipe to fall apart. I mean, it's a recipe to hate your sport. And this sport can be so many wonderful things for people. It doesn't just have to be racing. And if
Yeah.
that's the value you have in it, and that's where you feel like you are as a person is only through your results or only through one thing in your life, then you start to question your identity. I think in the end, if that part starts to slip away for some reason. So that kind of value of spreading out my identity is what I'm trying to help teach others, right? So go play violin, go be in a play, go whatever. You have a commitment because you're on a track team and you have a track practice or a track meet. Good, go do that. I don't want you to be so invested in cycling that you end up going to college and wanting a break from it, right? Because you're sick of it, right? I don't want that, because I want this to be a lifelong sport. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question per se, but I think it originates from my own faults of tying myself too closely to my sport, and then also seeing the benefits over time of having myself distributed in all different areas of life. And then it does bring me a lot of different meaning. So if one piece starts to struggle in some way, I don't feel like I myself am struggling. I feel like that one piece might be in a low point, and I have all these other things that bring richness to my life still.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Kelly, where can people find you if they want to follow along with your story, or maybe more importantly, if they want to give some money to the support the Devo team? Where can they find those things?
Yeah. Oh, goodness. I'd love if people want to donate. So the website, teamkelcat.com, has a lot more information about me. And admittedly, I need to probably update it. It's one of those, like, it has enough to share the story. And also, I need to put more photos of the Devo team. But that website, so teamkelcat.com, has a link to donate. It takes you to PayPal and you can donate. If someone doesn't have PayPal or is allergic to it or whatever, there is other ways, and there's a contact us button on that webpage, on multiple pages, where someone can reach out directly, and it goes to my email, and they can request a way to, like, send a check or something like that. That's fine too. Yeah, and then how to find me and updates and all that stuff. Probably the most regular updating is through my Instagram, which is linked to my Facebook. So it's at kelly.catale. I'm pretty sure. I actually haven't looked at my handle in a long time, but I'm pretty sure it's at kelly.catale. There's also at Team Kelcat, which is a little quiet right now because of my bandwidth, but it is where I try to share stuff about the Devo team and even my own racing too every once in a while. So yeah, both of those Instagrams would be the way to find me. And we have kind of, if you search for me on Facebook, you'd find my personal page and also my athlete page. So there's plenty out there to find me. But those would be the primary ones that I interact with most, is Instagram.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for coming on today and having some really honest conversation with me just about life and about mental health and everything else.
This was a joy. Thank you so much for inviting me and asking such great questions. I'm truly grateful for the time. Thank you.
Thanks for listening today and being a part of the conversation between Kelly and me. Do me a favor and reach out to those around you and let them know that you care about them, that you love them. Because, as always, the heaviness of life is always, always made lighter when we know we aren't alone. Stable Cyclist Podcast is a weekly-ish show. We used to say monthly or bi-monthly, but it has definitely turned into a weekly-ish show focusing on long-form conversations about bikes, mentality, and when the situation is right, we will dive deep into mental health. Episodes typically drop on Fridays, but we'll have bonus pods when possible as well, and we've got some amazing guests coming up in the month of June and July. Have an amazing day. Thank you so much for listening, and most importantly, remember, you are loved.